my daughter-in-law and my grandson thought it would be funny to leave me behind on a lonely road, 200 meters from home during a violent storm. "Run, old lady. Learn to survive," he said. I never returned. 8 months later, they finally found me. I'm glad you're here to listen. Stay until the end, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to know how far my story travels. The windshield wipers fought against the downpour as lightning split the sky ahead. I sat in the passenger seat of my grandson Lance's pickup truck, clutching my purse as thunder rolled across the fields. At 66, I should have known better than to fully trust a 28-year-old who barely looked me in the eye anymore. "Thank you for taking me to my appointment, dear," I said, raising my voice over the storm. "It's a long drive, I know." Lance didn't answer. His jaw was tense. That same cold expression I'd seen ever since he started dating Oilia. She had changed him. My sweet, gentle boy was gone. "The GPS says we're still 2 hours away," I continued softly. "Maybe we should pull over until the storm passes." That's when I felt the car slowing down. At first I thought he was doing the sensible thing, finding somewhere safe to stop. But then he turned onto a rough gravel road that led straight into emptiness. My heart sank. "Lance, where are we going?" He didn't reply. He stopped the truck in the middle of what looked like an abandoned lot, nothing but dark fields stretching in every direction. "Get out," he said flatly. I blinked at him, thinking I'd misheard. "What?" "I said get out, Grandma." When he turned to face me, I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tighten. Not anger, not frustration, but cold indifference. "Olia and I are done," he said. "Done with your appointments, your pills, your constant complaints. You've become a burden." The words cut deeper than any knife. "Lance, I don't understand." "I've never asked for anything I didn't need." He laughed bitterly. "You've been draining us for years. Do you have any idea how much we've spent on you? How many weekends we've lost driving you around because you're too scared to go alone?" I felt my hands tremble. "My doctor said my heart condition—" "Your heart condition?" he interrupted with a cruel smirk. "You mean your excuses for attention? You're not sick, Grandma. You're just old and weak." Rain pounded harder, echoing like angry fists against the metal roof. "Please, Lance," I whispered. "Where am I supposed to go?" He reached across me, opened the door, and icy wind rushed in. "Run along," he said. "Time to learn how to live on your own." I couldn't move. The shock froze me in place. "You can't mean this." "Watch me," he said sharply. Every word was another wound. He leaned closer, his voice rising. "Oilia was right. You've been living off our kindness long enough. We're done carrying you." That word, done, echoed in my ears. I thought about the boy I'd raised since he was 8 years old, after the accident took his parents. I'd worked double shifts just to buy his clothes, his school supplies, his baseball gloves. I'd sat through every parent-teacher conference, every game, every play. "I raised you," I whispered, voice shaking. "When you had no one, I gave you everything." He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the open door. "Come on, I don't have all day." The mud sucked at my shoes as I stumbled out. Rain soaked through my clothes instantly, clinging to my skin. Through the rain, I saw him shift the truck into reverse, the red of his taillights glowing faintly through the storm. "Lance, please don't do this," I shouted, running after him. But the truck was already disappearing down the road, and then silence. Only the storm and me, standing alone, drenched and shivering, realizing the truth. The family I'd built my entire life around had just abandoned me like I was nothing. I pulled out my phone, no signal. Thunder rolled above. I looked around, desperate for shelter. That's when I saw it, a faint outline through the rain, a small, lonely building in the distance. And that's where my story truly began. It looked like an old gas station or maybe a small convenience store. With nowhere else to turn, I began walking toward it, each step a battle against the wind and mud. As I pushed forward through that storm, soaked and shivering, something inside me broke. Not just my heart, that had already shattered beyond repair, but something deeper. The part of me that believed family meant safety. The part that still trusted love could never turn cruel. By the time I reached the building, which turned out to be an abandoned auto repair shop, I was no longer the same woman who had stepped into Lance's truck that morning. I was someone else now. Someone who finally understood that the people you protect most can sometimes be the ones who hurt you the deepest. The shop was locked, but a small overhang offered a little shelter from the downpour. I pressed myself against the cold metal door, teeth chattering so hard they made a sound of their own. Rainwater dripped from my hair and sleeves. The chill crawled into my bones. I don't know how long I stood there. An hour, maybe 3. Time blurred in that storm. Every few minutes I pulled out my phone, hoping for a single bar of signal, but the screen stayed blank. No service, no help, no one left to call. Then I heard it. A truck engine approaching. For one desperate second, hope flared in my chest. Maybe Lance had come back. Maybe he'd realized what he'd done. But as the headlights cut through the sheets of rain, I saw it wasn't his red pickup. This one was older, white with rust spreading along the edges. The truck slowed beside the repair shop, and an elderly man climbed out, wearing a rain jacket and a worried look. He must have been around 70, with kind eyes behind thin glasses. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he called, hurrying toward me through the storm. I tried to answer, but my throat was too cold, my voice breaking into a faint rasp. "Good heavens, you're soaked through," he said, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around my shoulders. "I'm Harold Morrison. My wife and I live just down the road. What are you doing out here all alone?" I wanted to tell him everything, how my own grandson had left me like I was nothing, but the words wouldn't come. My ride left," I finally managed to whisper. Harold's face changed. "Left you? In this weather?" His voice was quiet now, heavy with disbelief. "Who would do such a thing?" I had no answer for that, not one I could bear to say out loud. "Well, come on then," Harold said gently. "Let's get you out of this cold. We'll figure out the rest later." He helped me into his truck and turned the heat up until warm air filled the cabin. That simple act, kindness from a stranger, broke something loose in me. Tears came again, deep and uncontrollable, rolling down my cheeks as the storm howled outside. Harold didn't ask questions. He just drove carefully through the rain, stealing concerned glances in my direction. When we reached his home, a modest ranch-style house with a welcoming porch light, he hurried out to help me inside. The front door opened before we reached it. A woman, about Harold's age, stood waiting with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun. "Harold Morrison, what have you brought me this time?" she asked, half scolding, half laughing, but her eyes softened the moment she saw me. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, rushing forward. "Come in, sweetheart. Let's get you warm." "This is my wife, Margaret," Harold explained. "She was out there at the old Murphy place. Someone left her in the storm." Margaret's expression darkened. "Left her? In this weather?" Her voice trembled with anger. "What kind of person would do that?" That word, elderly, slipped somewhere between her concern and her outrage. I'd never thought of myself that way before. In my mind, I was still the woman who'd worked long hours to raise Lance, who'd stayed up all night nursing him when he was sick, who'd cheered the loudest when he crossed that graduation stage. But standing there, dripping on Margaret's clean floor, I felt every single one of my 66 years. "Let's get you into a hot shower first," Margaret said, her tone firm but full of care. "Then we'll talk." She led me down the hall to a small guest bathroom, left clean towels and a warm robe. When the hot water finally hit my skin, it felt like life itself was returning to me. The heat melted away the numbness, and for the first time since that nightmare began, I cried softly, not from fear, but from grief. Grief for the life I thought I still had. When I came out 20 minutes later, Margaret was waiting with a steaming mug of tea and a bowl of soup. The smell alone brought tears to my eyes. "Now then," she said, sitting across from me, "tell us what happened." And so I did. I told them everything, about Lance, about Oilia, about the years of love, sacrifice, and loyalty that ended with me left in the rain. I told them about the medical bills Lance always complained about, bills I'd been trying to handle myself, even with my small monthly income. I told them how I'd stayed silent every time Oilia made one of her sharp little comments about my age, my looks, my worth. Through it all, Harold and Margaret listened quietly, their faces growing more troubled with each word. "That boy should be ashamed of himself," Harold said finally, his voice tight with anger. "After everything you did for him, where will you go now?" Margaret asked softly, "Do you have anyone else?" I shook my head. "Lance was all I had left," I whispered. "My husband passed 15 years ago. Lance's father was my only child." The weight of it, the loneliness, hit me like it was brand new. "I suppose I'll just find a way home somehow," I said weakly. Margaret's tone was calm, but there was no softness in her question. "Home to what, dear? If they've done this once, what makes you think they won't do it again?" Her words stayed with me like a chill in my bones. She was right. Even if I went back, even if I swallowed my pride and begged to be forgiven, nothing would change. I would still be the problem to fix, the expense to minimize, the presence that made everyone uncomfortable. "You'll stay here tonight," Harold said firmly. "Tomorrow, when the weather clears, we'll figure things out." I wanted to argue, to say I couldn't impose, but the truth was simple. I had nowhere else. No money for a hotel, no nearby friends, no family waiting for me. That night, lying in the Morrisons' guest bed under clean lavender-scented sheets, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I wasn't going back. I couldn't go back to being the woman who apologized for taking up space. Lance had told me to learn to take care of myself. Fine. Maybe it was time I finally did. The next morning, I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee drifting through the hallway. Margaret was already in the kitchen, moving around with the graceful rhythm of someone who'd been cooking all her life. "Sleep well?" she asked, handing me a steaming cup. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. For the first time in months, I had slept without guilt, without wondering if my existence was an inconvenience. "Harold went into town for a few errands," she said, setting a plate of eggs and toast in front of me. "But before he left, he mentioned something you might want to hear. The library in town is looking for a part-time volunteer for their literacy program." I looked up from my plate. "A volunteer? It doesn't pay much," she said quickly, "but it might be a good start. Something to get you back on your feet." As she spoke, sunlight filled the small kitchen, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe Lance had unknowingly done me a favor. Maybe that storm had been the push I needed to start living for myself. 3 weeks later, I stood outside the Millbrook Public Library, smoothing down my skirt and taking a deep breath. Margaret had taken me shopping at a little thrift store, insisting that I needed clothes that made me feel like myself again. When you spend years trying not to be a burden, you stop caring about how you look. That morning, when I was getting ready, Margaret had smiled at me and said, "You look wonderful, Vi." Vi, not Viola. The name that always felt distant and formal, and certainly not Grandma. The name that now carried more pain than pride. Just Vi. Simple, strong, new. The library director, Susan Chen, greeted me with a warm smile. She was in her 40s, friendly, with an energy that instantly put me at ease. "Welcome to the team, Vi," she said, leading me through the quiet aisles lined with books. "I'm so glad you're here to help with our adult literacy program. Many of our students are older adults. I think they'll connect with you beautifully." I had told Susan only part of my story, that I was recently widowed and looking for a fresh start. Some truths were too heavy for job interviews. As she showed me around, I felt something stirring inside, a sense of purpose, not obligation, not guilt, but real, genuine purpose. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving someone else's expectations. I was building something of my own. My first student was a man named Frank, mid-70s, broad-shouldered, with hands that looked like they'd built half the town. He had spent his whole life hiding the fact that he couldn't read, covering it up with humor and quick thinking. During our second lesson, he chuckled as he stumbled through a paragraph about gardening. "Never thought I'd be sittin' in a library at my age," he said, shaking his head. I smiled. Life's funny that way, isn't it? Sometimes it gives you a second chance when you least expect it. He looked at me then, really looked, and nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "guess it does." And for the first time in a long while, I believed it too. "Never thought I'd be teaching in one," I replied. Frank looked up at me, surprise softening his face. "You seem like the kind of person who's always been around books," he said. I smiled faintly, remembering all those nights I'd read to Lance when he was a boy, how he'd curl up beside me, eyes wide with wonder as I gave every character a different voice. "I've always loved stories," I said quietly. "I just never had the chance to share that love with someone who truly wanted to learn." Frank nodded slowly. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. That was one of the unexpected gifts of this new life. People here didn't need to know your entire past to accept you in the present. After my shift, I walked home to my new apartment, a small studio above Mrs. Patterson's flower shop. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The sunlight streamed through wide old windows, warming the worn wood floors and the little reading chair I'd placed by the window. Margaret had helped me furnish it, a table and 2 chairs from a yard sale, a quilt she'd sewn herself, a vase of fresh flowers from Mrs. Patterson. Everything in that room had been touched by kindness. It might not have been much, but it was the first space in years that felt truly mine. I'd kept my bank account under my legal name, Viola Patterson. I'd gone back to my maiden name after my husband's passing, something Lance had never approved of. But here, in Millbrook, I wasn't Viola Patterson. To everyone here, I was Vi Morrison, not legally, but in spirit. Margaret had introduced me that way to her friends, and somehow it had stuck. Vi Morrison, the librarian's assistant who lived above the flower shop. Vi Morrison, who had moved to town after her husband's death to begin again. And strangely, it didn't feel like a lie. It felt like stepping into a version of myself I'd always been meant to become. Someone independent, steady, and quietly strong. Evenings became my favorite time of day. I'd make myself a simple dinner, soup, toast, sometimes scrambled eggs, and sit by the window, watching the town unwind below. Mrs. Patterson would lock up the flower shop, wave up at me before heading home. The little restaurant across the street would fill with laughter and soft conversation. For the first time in decades, life was quiet, but not empty, peaceful. I'd started keeping a journal, something I'd never done before. It helped me make sense of everything I'd been through. That night I wrote, "Frank read a full page today without stumbling once. The look on his face was like watching the sunrise. I think I'm starting to remember what it feels like to be useful. Really useful." Then I paused, pen hovering over the page. Did Lance ever think about me? Did Oilia feel even an ounce of regret? Part of me wanted to imagine them worrying, Lance unable to sleep, realizing the cruelty of what he'd done. But a wiser part of me knew better. Their guilt, or lack of it, wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent years shrinking myself for their comfort, trying to be less visible, less needy, less there. But here, in Millbrook, I didn't have to apologize for existing. When Mrs. Patterson asked me to water her plants while she visited her daughter, it was a simple favor, not a debt. When Margaret invited me to Sunday dinner, it wasn't obligation, it was friendship. When Susan praised my work at the library, it wasn't pity, it was genuine appreciation. The difference was profound. I had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, not out of duty, but out of choice. 2 months into my new life, the first test arrived. Margaret and I were having coffee at the diner when I overheard a conversation from the booth behind us. "The Morrison place," a woman said. "You know Harold and Maggie Morrison? Lovely couple. I heard they've been helping some woman who had a falling out with her family." My stomach tightened. Margaret's eyes flicked up, meeting mine. "What kind of trouble?" another voice asked. "Not sure," the first replied. "Something about being left behind somewhere. Maggie won't talk about it. You know how she is about helping strays." That word, strays, hit like a slap. Margaret's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "Small towns," she murmured. "People talk. It doesn't mean anything." But we both knew it did. In towns like this, rumors could move faster than the wind, and my carefully built new life could crumble just as quickly. That night, back in my little apartment, I made another decision. If I was going to rebuild, I'd do it completely. No more half measures, no more fear, no more looking back. I pulled out my phone and searched Lance's name for the first time since that night. Then, calmly, I blocked his number, and Oilia's. Then I deleted them both. If they ever wanted to find me, they'd have to try, and if that day came, I'd be ready. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was in the children's corner of the library, rearranging books by color and size, when I heard Susan answer the phone in her office. Her tone shifted almost immediately, from cheerful to quiet, cautious. After a few minutes, she stepped out, her expression unreadable. "Vi," she said softly, "there's someone here? Asking for you?" "Vi, there's someone on the phone asking for you," Susan said carefully. "A woman named Betty Hutchkins. She says she's a neighbor of yours, from your old town." My hands froze around the book I was shelving, a picture book about a little bear who gets lost in the woods. The title couldn't have been more ironic. Betty Hutchkins. The name pulled me back like a sudden chill. I remembered her, 3 houses down from Lance and Oilia, the type of neighbor who knew everyone's business before they did, and loved to tell it, too. "She says it's important," Susan added. "Something about your family being worried about you." That word, family, made my chest tighten. It was the same feeling I used to get whenever Lance came home angry, ready to find someone to blame. But this time, instead of shrinking, I took a steady breath and made a decision. "I'll take it," I said quietly. I walked into Susan's office, closed the door, and picked up the receiver. Viola Patterson," came Betty's voice. Too loud, too familiar. "Thank goodness I found you. I've been calling libraries all over the state." "Hello, Betty," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm, though my pulse had quickened. "What can I do for you?" "Well, I'd think you'd want to know what's been going on with that grandson of yours since you disappeared." I could hear the excitement in her tone. Betty always did love being the first to share bad news. "I didn't disappear, Betty," I said. "I moved, quietly." "Viola, people have been worried sick. Lance has been beside himself." That almost made me laugh, though it came out more like a sigh. Lance beside himself? The same man who left me in a storm and drove away without looking back. "What exactly has Lance been telling people?" I asked. There was a pause. I could almost hear her hesitate, deciding how much to embellish. "Well," she said at last, "he told folks you'd had some kind of breakdown, said you wandered off during one of your doctor appointments and he's been searching for you ever since." A breakdown. Of course, a perfect story. Poor, dutiful Lance, caring for his unstable grandmother. It made him look noble, and me like the problem. "Did he mention anything about where I supposedly wandered off?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "He said it was during a storm, that you got confused and walked away from the car." "I see." My voice stayed calm, but inside I was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. Even his lies carried fragments of truth. "And how has Lance been handling my absence?" I asked. Betty's voice lowered, as if she were leaning closer to her own phone. "Well, since you ask, not too well, I'm afraid. That wife of his, Oilia, she's been having some difficulties." "What kind of difficulties?" "Money troubles, mostly," Betty said. "They've been behind on their mortgage for months. Lance lost his job at the warehouse about 6 weeks ago. Some say it was budget cuts, but others say—" Her voice dropped even lower. "He was showing up after a few too many drinks." I gripped the phone tighter. 6 weeks ago, just 2 weeks after they left me on that road. "And there's more," Betty continued, clearly relishing the role of messenger. "Oilia's been seen around town with that Miller boy, the one who works at the gas station. Young fella, early 20s. People are starting to talk." I pictured Oilia, perfect hair, perfect nails, always complaining that Lance didn't work hard enough, didn't make enough money, didn't try. It didn't surprise me that she'd go looking elsewhere once things got hard, but then Betty said something that made everything click. "The real problem," she whispered, "is that they can't manage without you. The house is falling apart. No one's been keeping up with the yard or the bills. Lance tried fixing the kitchen sink himself and flooded half the place, and that wife of his can't seem to keep anyone hired. They can't afford it." As she spoke, the picture became painfully clear. For all their complaints about me being a burden, Lance and Oilia had depended on me for everything, managing the house, organizing repairs, paying bills on time. I had been the quiet center holding their chaos together. Without me, it was all collapsing. "There's something else," Betty added, her voice lowering again. "I probably shouldn't even say this, but my cousin works at the bank. Word is, they're in real trouble. The foreclosure notice went up last week." Foreclosure. The house I'd helped pay for, the home I'd kept running with my pension checks, my savings, my labor, being taken away. And suddenly it all made perfect sense. They didn't want me back because they loved me. They wanted me back because they needed me. "Betty," I said slowly, "has anyone mentioned contacting the police about my so-called disappearance?" "Oh yes," she said quickly. "Lance filed a missing person report weeks ago. He's been just heartbroken." Heartbroken? I almost laughed again. A dry, soundless laugh that felt more like disbelief than humor. The world, it seemed, was perfectly willing to believe his story. And why wouldn't they? He was young, handsome, sympathetic, the devoted grandson searching for his lost, fragile grandmother. Meanwhile, the truth was far less flattering. "Thank you for letting me know, Betty," I said, my voice steady now. "I appreciate it." "Oh, of course, dear. We've all been worried. You'll let Lance know you're safe, won't you?" I hesitated for only a moment. Then I said, "Yes, Betty. I'll take care of it." When I hung up, I sat there in silence, the hum of the office filling the room. For the first time, I felt no fear, only clarity. They had thrown me away thinking I couldn't survive without them, but now they were the ones sinking, and I was the one standing tall. "But between you and me," Betty went on, lowering her voice, "the police don't seem too worried. They said since you're an adult and there's no sign of wrongdoing, there's not much they can do if you don't want to be found. Smart officers. They'd probably seen families like mine before." "I appreciate you calling to let me know, Betty," I said, "but I need you to understand something." I paused, choosing every word carefully. I didn't wander off. I didn't have a breakdown. I made a conscious decision to leave a situation that was harmful to me. I'm safe, I'm well, and I'm exactly where I want to be. Betty went quiet for a moment. "But Viola, they're your family." "No, Betty," I said, my voice firm now. "Family doesn't abandon each other in storms. Family doesn't call each other burdens. Family doesn't lie about what really happened when things go wrong." There was a long silence. Then she spoke, her voice smaller. "I won't tell them I found you," she said. "But, Viola, they're struggling. Whatever happened, they need help." When I hung up, I stayed in Susan's office for a long time, staring out at the peaceful little main street of Millbrook. Children were walking home from school, their backpacks swinging as they laughed with friends. An older man passed by with his dog, stopping to chat with neighbors along the way. Ordinary life, simple, kind, untouched by manipulation or guilt. So Lance had lost his job. Oilia was seeing someone else. They were losing the house. Part of me, the part that had spent years taking care of them, fixing their mistakes, putting their comfort before my own, wanted to feel sorry for them. But another part, stronger and quieter, felt something else. Justice. Not the cruel kind that celebrates pain, but the gentle kind that arrives naturally when people finally face the consequences of their choices. They had decided I was disposable, that I'd always be there to clean up their messes, no matter how they treated me. Now, they were learning what life looked like without me. That evening, I sat on Margaret's porch while Harold tended to his garden. I told her about the call. "So, they're looking for you," she said thoughtfully when I finished. "How does that make you feel?" It was such a simple question, but I had to think before answering. How did it feel, knowing that the people who'd discarded me were now desperate to have me back? "Powerful," I said finally. The word surprised even me. Margaret smiled softly. "Good. You should feel powerful. You hold all the cards now." Later, walking home beneath the streetlights, I turned her words over in my mind. "They need help," Betty had said. Maybe they did, but need and deserve were not the same thing. After 6 months of living free from their constant criticism, I finally understood that difference. It started with a single phone call one Thursday afternoon. Susan found me in the children's corner of the library. Her face was pale, her voice uneasy. "Vi," she said, "there's a man on the phone. He says he's your grandson." The words hit like a stone dropping into water. After 8 months of peace, they'd finally found me. I'd been expecting this moment, not with fear, but with preparation. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "Nothing yet. He's waiting on the line." I nodded and followed her to the office, my pulse steady, my thoughts clear. I picked up the receiver. "Hello, Lance," I said. "Grandma." His voice cracked on the word, and for a second I could almost hear the little boy who used to run into my arms after nightmares. "Grandma, thank God. We've been looking everywhere for you." "Have you?" I asked quietly. There was a pause, the kind that comes when someone doesn't get the reaction they expected. When I didn't rush to apologize, his tone changed. "Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what you've put us through? We thought you were gone. We've been worried sick." Worried sick, the same man who once called me a burden, the same man who left me in a storm without a second glance. "What do you want, Lance?" I asked calmly. "What do I want? I want you to come home. We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. We can work this out." "A misunderstanding," I repeated slowly. "So that's what you're calling it now." "I'm quite comfortable where I am," I said. "If you need to talk, you can do it over the phone." "Grandma, please, you don't understand. Things have been really hard without you. We made some mistakes, but we can fix this. We're family." There it was again. Family. That magical word they thought could erase everything. "Lance," I said, my voice colder now, "listen to me very carefully. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to abandon your grandmother in a storm, 200 meters from home. You chose to call me worthless. You chose to lie to everyone and say I'd lost my mind instead of admitting what you'd done. Grandma, please. I'm not finished." My voice cut through his pleading like a blade. "You're calling me now not because you miss me or because you're sorry, but because you need me. Because you and Oilia can't manage your lives without someone to blame for your failures and clean up your messes." The line went silent. For a long moment, I thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, colder, harder. "You're right," he said. "We do need you, but you need us too. You're 66, living who knows where, probably burning through whatever money you've got left. What happens when you get sick? When you can't take care of yourself anymore?" It was a threat dressed up as concern, and we both knew it. "I seem to be managing just fine," I said evenly. "For now," he countered, "but you can't keep this up forever. Come home, Grandma. We'll fix this. We'll be better." I closed my eyes, remembering all the times he'd said those exact words, after he stole from me as a teenager, after he crashed my car and lied about it, after he moved Oilia into my home without asking, and somehow made me feel like the intruder. "No," I said simply, and I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it ring, then again. And again. Over the next 3 days, Lance called the library 62 times. Susan finally had to assign another employee to answer the phone because he was tying up the lines. At first, his messages were pleading. "Grandma, please, just talk to me. I know we hurt you, but we can fix this." Then came the anger. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. We're trying to make things right and you won't even listen." Then desperation. "The house is gone, Grandma. We lost it. Oilia left me. I have nowhere to go. Please." And finally, threats. "I know where you are now. I'm coming to get you whether you like it or not. You can't just abandon your family." Susan grew concerned enough to call the local police, but they said there wasn't much they could do unless he actually showed up and caused trouble. Until then, it was just harassment. I could file a restraining order if I wanted, they said. I didn't. This wasn't for the law to settle. This was between Lance and me. Saturday morning, I was outside watering the flower boxes beneath Mrs. Patterson's shop windows when a familiar red pickup slowed to the curb. My pulse jumped, but I didn't move. I kept watering, forcing my hands to stay steady even as they trembled. The driver's door opened. Lance stepped out. I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight, and not in the healthy way. His shirt hung loose on his shoulders. His hair was greasy, his eyes sunken. He looked like a man haunted by his own choices. "Hello, Lance," I said without turning. "Jesus, Grandma, you look—" He stopped mid-sentence, staring at me. And I suppose I did look different. Months of peace had changed me. I'd gained a little healthy weight, my skin had color again from spending time outdoors, and my clothes actually fit. I looked like someone living, not just surviving. "You look good," he finished weakly. "Thank you," I said. "You don't." He flinched. The old me would have softened then, asked if he was eating, if he needed money, if there was something I could do. But the woman standing there that morning wasn't that person anymore. He shifted uncomfortably. "Can we talk?" "We're talking now. I mean, really talk. Somewhere private." I finally looked at him. Really looked. The boy I'd raised was gone. What stood before me was a man hollowed out by the very selfishness he'd once directed at me. "You can say whatever you need to say right here," I told him. He glanced around. It was early, but Main Street was already waking up, people walking their dogs, the diner across the road filling with the smell of coffee and pancakes. "I'm sorry," he said at last, "for what we did that night, for leaving you. It was wrong." I waited. Nothing more came. "And?" I prompted. "And I want you to come home," he said quickly. "I know things got out of hand, but we can start over. I've learned my lesson." "What lesson is that, Lance?" He hesitated, frowning. That family is important." "Try again." His cheeks flushed red. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to understand what you did," I said quietly. "So I know you won't do it again." He was getting frustrated now, voice rising. "I said I'm sorry. What more do you want? You're my grandmother. You're supposed to forgive me." There it was, the same old entitlement, shining through like rust beneath chipped paint. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry that he was suffering because of it. "No, Lance," I said softly but firmly. "I'm not supposed to do anything anymore. That's what you taught me that night, in the storm." "Don't be like this," he pleaded. "I know you're mad, but you're all I have left. Oilia's gone. The house is gone. My job's gone. I need you." And there it was. The truth, raw and unfiltered. He didn't want me because he loved me. He wanted me because he'd run out of people to depend on. "That sounds like a lot of problems," I said, moving to the next planter. "I'm sure you'll figure something out." "Grandma, please," he said, voice breaking. For a moment, he almost sounded like that terrified 8-year-old boy again. "I don't know how to do this without you." I stopped watering, turned to him fully. "You should have thought of that," I said, my voice calm and unshakable, "before you threw me away." Lance's face shifted through a storm of emotions, hurt, anger, desperation, before settling into something cold and familiar. "You know what? Fine," he snapped. Be stubborn, but don't come crawling back when your little fantasy life falls apart. You're not as young as you think you are, Grandma. Someday you'll need help. Don't expect it from me. He climbed back into his truck and drove off, tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't move until the sound faded. Then I turned back to the flower boxes and finished watering them, my hands steady now that the confrontation was over. Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway, having clearly seen everything. You okay, hun? She asked gently. I looked down the street where Lance's red pickup had disappeared. Then at the morning around me, sunlight spilling across storefronts, people walking their dogs, children laughing in the park, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery next door. Yes, I said, and this time, I meant it. I'm exactly where I need to be. 2 years passed, quietly, like pages turning in a well-loved book. Peaceful years, productive years. I'd been promoted to head of the adult literacy program at the library. Between that and my social security, I was living comfortably, modestly but without fear. Frank could now read well enough to help his own grandson with homework. Together, we'd started a small group for others who wanted to learn later in life. I'd begun volunteering at the senior center, teaching basic computer skills to older adults who wanted to stay in touch with faraway family. The irony wasn't lost on me. Me, of all people, helping others stay connected while I'd severed my own family ties completely. But it felt right. The people I helped were loved by their families. They weren't tolerated or used. Their grandchildren called to share joy, not demand favors. Margaret had become the sister I never had, and Harold the big brother I always wished for. They'd adopted me into their family in every way that mattered. Holidays, birthdays, quiet Sunday dinners. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by love that came freely, without expectation. It was a crisp October morning. Golden leaves drifted down the sidewalks as I arranged books in the library's front window display. That's when I saw her. Even from across Main Street, I knew the posture. That practiced way of carrying herself, like every movement was meant for an audience. Oilia. Her once flawless appearance had faded. The sleek blonde hair now showed dark roots, her clothes still stylish but worn, like someone trying desperately to keep up appearances while everything beneath them was falling apart. She moved slowly, scanning building numbers, clearly searching for something, or someone. I watched as she stopped in front of Mrs. Patterson's flower shop, looked up toward the windows of my apartment above, then crossed the street and headed straight for the library. I had about 30 seconds to decide what to do. I could slip into the back office and let Susan tell her I wasn't available. I could step out the rear exit and disappear, leaving her wondering if she'd imagined seeing me. But that was the old me. 2 years in Millbrook had changed me. I no longer ran from difficult conversations. I didn't apologize for taking up space. So when the library doors swung open, I was standing right there at the circulation desk, calm, confident, and ready. She froze when she saw me, her carefully painted expression cracked for just a second, the shock plain in her eyes. I suppose I looked different again, well-dressed, confident, comfortable in my world. A woman reborn from the ashes of someone else's cruelty. "Viola," she said uncertainly. "Oilia," I replied evenly, professional. "What brings you to Millbrook?" Her eyes darted around the library, taking in the cheerful displays, the reading corner filled with my students, the community bulletin board full of smiling faces and success stories. It wasn't what she'd expected to find. "We need to talk," she said finally. "About what?" Her composure faltered. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked vulnerable. "About Lance," she said softly. "About everything that's happened." I gestured toward a small seating area by the windows. "We can talk here." She followed me, her heels clicking on the polished floor, still trying to project an air of control that no longer quite fit. "You look well," she said as we sat down. "I am well," I replied simply. "Very well. That's good." She fidgeted with her purse strap, searching for the right words. Viola, I know we didn't part on good terms. That's one way to put it. I just want you to know, I regret how things ended. We both said things we didn't mean. I studied her face, watching carefully. There was no sincerity in her eyes, just calculation, the same look she used to wear when convincing Lance to buy something they couldn't afford. What did you say that you didn't mean? I asked. She blinked, startled. Well, I said some harsh things about your age, your health, your finances. Those weren't things you said that night, I interrupted. Those were things you said for years, because that's what you really thought of me. Her mask slipped again, frustration flickering beneath the surface. You have to understand, she said, we were under a lot of stress. The mortgage, Lance's drinking, my job, it was all too much. We weren't thinking clearly. Lance's drinking. That was new. It explained a lot. Where is Lance now? I asked. She hesitated, eyes darting down to her purse before she answered. He's not doing well, Viola. After I left, he really fell apart. He's been living in a trailer park outside the city, working part-time at a gas station when he can keep a job. He drinks more now. He's angry. At everyone. Her voice trembled. He talks about you all the time, says you abandoned him, says you're selfish, that you turned your back on him when he needed you most. I took a slow breath, letting her words sink in. Of course he said that, because for people like Lance, and for people like her, it was easier to call someone selfish than to admit they'd pushed that person too far to stay. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Paint Lance as the victim, make me feel guilty for his poor choices, and then, when I was softened, deliver the real request. And what about you? I asked calmly. How are you doing, Oilia? I'm managing, she said quickly, then hesitated, realizing honesty might get her further. Actually, no. I'm not managing well at all. I'm working 2 part-time jobs, living in a tiny studio apartment. I had to sell my car and take the bus just to get here. She leaned forward, voice trembling with urgency. Viola, I know we treated you badly. I know we took you for granted, but we're family and families forgive each other. They help each other when times are hard. There it was, the ask. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. I'm not asking for much, she said finally. Just enough to get back on my feet. Maybe help Lance get into a treatment program. We could all start over, be the family we should have been. I sat back, studying this woman, the one who had spent years making my life miserable, the one who'd taught my grandson to see me as a burden, the one who had probably whispered the idea into his ear that night. Leave her. Oilia, I said softly, do you remember what Lance said to me that night in the storm? She shifted uneasily. He was upset. We both were. He called me a parasite, I continued evenly. He said I was pathetic. He told me to run along and learn to take care of myself. I met her eyes. So I did. She blinked, startled. But that's not who you really are. You're kind, generous, loving. You raised Lance when no one else would. You sacrificed everything for him. You're right, I said. I did sacrifice everything. My savings, my health, my self-respect, my peace, and in return, he threw me away like I was nothing. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe real, maybe not. People make mistakes, Viola, she said. Even terrible ones. But that doesn't mean they can't change. You're absolutely right, I said, standing. People can change. I'm living proof. She looked up, confused. I changed from someone who let herself be used into someone who knows her worth, from someone who apologized for existing into someone who lives with purpose, from someone terrified of being alone into someone who enjoys her own company. I walked to the window, looking out at the calm street that had become my world. What I won't change back into, I said, turning to her, is someone who rescues others from the consequences of their own choices. But we're family, she said desperately. I shook my head. No, Family doesn't abandon each other in storms. Family doesn't call each other parasites. Family doesn't lie to protect themselves when things fall apart. She was crying openly now, and for the first time since I'd met her, it looked genuine. "What are we supposed to do?" she whispered. "How are we supposed to survive without you?" "The same way I survived without you," I said simply, "by learning to take care of yourselves." I went to the circulation desk and scribbled something on a piece of paper, then handed it to her. "What's this?" "The address of a social services office near you," I said. "They have programs for addiction recovery and job training. If Lance truly wants help, that's where he can begin." She stared at the paper as if it were written in another language. "But what about us? What about our relationship?" "We don't have a relationship, Oelia. We never did. You tolerated me because I was useful, and I tolerated you because I thought that's what family meant." I sat across from her one last time. "Listen carefully," I said. "This is the last time we'll have this conversation. I am not responsible for fixing Lance's life or yours. I am not obligated to sacrifice my peace for your comfort, and I will never again apologize for choosing to live free of chaos." "You can't just cut us off forever?" she said weakly. "I'm not cutting you off," I replied. "I'm setting boundaries. If Lance gets sober, if he takes responsibility for what he did, if he truly apologizes not because he wants something, but because he understands the pain he caused, then maybe one day we can talk. Maybe." I stood, signaling that we were done. But that's his choice to make, not yours, and not mine. Oelia gathered her purse and rose shakily. At the door, she turned back once more. "I hope you'll change your mind," she said. "I hope you won't need me to," I replied. After she left, I sat in my chair by the window, watching the rhythms of my little town unfold. Mrs. Patterson was arranging autumn flowers in her shop window. Harold was walking his dog, stopping to chat with neighbors. Children passed by after school, their laughter carried on the crisp, bright air. This was my life now. These were my people. This was my peace. Frank arrived for his reading session, bringing along his neighbor, a shy man named Joe who'd finally worked up the courage to admit he wanted to learn to read. "Vi," Frank said proudly, "meet Joe. He's ready to start his own reading adventure." I smiled, setting aside the past once and for all. "Welcome, Joe," I said. "Let's start with something simple, a story about new beginnings." As I opened the book and began to read, that familiar sense of calm washed over me, the same feeling that had saved me 2 years before. This was who I was now. Vi Morrison, librarian, teacher, friend, a woman who helped others build themselves up instead of letting herself be torn down. Outside, autumn leaves danced across the street, spinning free from the branches that once held them, making space for new growth. And I realized, some endings aren't really endings at all. They're just beginnings in disguise. Closing narration for YouTube. And now I'd love to hear from you. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Have you ever had to walk away from people who only took and never gave? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're here, check out the 2 stories on screen now. They're among our community favorites, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for watching, and for listening all the way to the end.